welcome to this gathering today of Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. We are so glad that you are with us today. My name is Beth Burns. I am the president of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, and we are really glad for your support and for your interest in going behind the scenes with the St. Paul Public Library. Have you ever wondered how a book makes it onto the shelf at the library? Well, today is the day you're going to find out the answer to that and more questions about how materials find their way into the library system, onto the shelves, and into libraries around the state and even around the world. We've got 3 videos that we have made and are going to share with you today about how all of this works and what the Material Management Center is. So if you've got questions, today is the day you're going to get answers about how the library comes together. I will also be in conversation with 3 colleagues who work at the St. Paul Public Library and work every day to make sure that we have the materials and information that we need at our fingertips. I'll be joined by Jessica Zilhart, Patrick Reckes-Jackson, and Becky Ammerman. We'll be in conversation between 3 different videos that again help us go behind the scenes. And let's get started. The first video we are going to watch is how a new book makes it into the system. I'll be back in a minute after we watch this video, and then we'll jump into conversation with our friends. Thanks. So with that, I am going to let colleagues of mine introduce themselves briefly. And Jessica, I'm going to start with you. Tell us your name, your role, and maybe a bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. Thanks for having us. So my name is Jessica Zilhart. I'm the Materials Management Supervisor for the St. Paul Public Library. So that sort of entails kind of higher level supervision for almost all things collection related. So buying books, adding them to the catalog, making it so they can check out, and then also interlibrary loan. I started with St. Paul in 2016, so 5 years ago, as a selector. So I was doing adult nonfiction then, and then my background had been in selecting children's books, actually. So I worked at a previous library system doing that. Yeah, it's really exciting work. You know, when I was in library school, I was like, you know, it'd be an amazing job to have, and like now I have it. So
yay! Oh, what a good thing to be able to say.
Yeah, really grateful for that. So that's a little bit about me.
That's great, Patrick.
I am Patrick Reckes-Jackson. I have been with the library for 23 years. I started as a shelver and have worked at almost every branch and in almost every job type within the library. I'm currently half of our interlibrary loan department, and also one of the selectors. I select the audiovisual materials for the library, music and movies.
Wonderful. And Becky.
I am Becky Ammerman. I've been with the St. Paul Public Library as a cataloger since January 2020. have a lot of cataloging experience prior to that, but it was always my dream to work at a public library. So I'm very excited to be here, and especially St. Paul Public Library. I moved here about 4 years ago, and really one of the things that I did very intentionally was visit a lot of the branches in the St. Paul Public Library just to get a feel for the city.
Thank you all for being with us today again. Jessica, I'm going to go back to you. I would love it if you could just help us visualize, what is the Materials Management Center? Where are you? What do you guys do? How many staff do you have?
Yeah, so we are located on like the far east side of St. Paul. We can like see 3M from our house, I always say. So we're like attached to the Sunray Library. And it's really sort of, it's the hub for the collections in the library. So it's the place where we choose which books to buy and send them out. And we've got a staff of 14 people to do that. So there's me and a cataloging librarian who supervises 2 other catalogers, a selection librarian, and then a team of 2 other selectors. We have a person who is our acquisitions and receiving person, 3 people who do processing, which is the wonderful folks who like make it so you can check out a book and it has a barcode and a spine label and is in the catalog. So, really important work there. And then 2 shipping and receiving clerks. And I think if you add that up, it comes, and 2 interlibrary loan staff as well. And if you add that up, it comes to 15 because, as Patrick mentioned, he has a dual role. So he gets to be 2 people. Yeah, so that is where we are and what we do.
And you have a cool truck. I know we'll be seeing throughout our time
Yes.
today some videos that were produced by the library. And so as you see that truck, recognize that that is part of how MMC gets its work done as well. I think one of the things that is really a great starting point is just as how does a book find its way into the St. Paul Public Library collection? And Patrick, I heard you say you're a selector. And so I'm going to ask you, can you tell us a little bit more about what we would have just seen in the video about how a book makes it into the system? How do you decide what to buy? There are so many books out there. I mean, just sort of how does a book find its way to the shelf?
Well, it's different for each of the different collections within the library. My areas of focus, being movies and music, are very different marketplaces in which to operate than, say, fiction or nonfiction. When a movie comes out on DVD, I generally have an idea of how popular it will be already because it has played in the theater, or if it has not played in the theater, that tells me something else about it. Whereas as a fiction selector, you dig through reviews, you look at upcoming publication calendars. A lot of times publishers have an idea how popular things will be, but they don't always get it right. So we have to know what the people of St. Paul like, that is, because we're a different group with different interests than the broad country as a whole, and even each library individually within the St. Paul system has different types of materials that are most popular and less popular.
So thinking about popular and less popular, can one of you tell me, like, when a title does get really hot, how do you know how many copies to buy? I don't know, Becky or Jessica, what do you do when there's just tremendous demand for a book? Are you able to order more? What happens for a hot title?
Yeah, so I mean, ideally, like a couple of things have happened and will happen if that happens. So like, to Patrick's point, a lot of times like publishers sort of like telegraph ahead of time, like at least sort of like how much marketing they will put behind it by releasing the size of their print run. So, if something's getting like 50,000 copies, like you just know you need to get a bunch for the library. So sort of ideally, if something is hot, we would have like already bought a lot of copies. But certainly when I was doing adult nonfiction, there were like many times where I was like, I will get 2 of this. And then, I looked the next day and there's like 30 people already waiting for it. So we do try to maintain like steady holds ratios. So, this many holds per copy of the item. So that's a way we would try to figure out how many copies to buy sort of once we know how many holds there are. And I would say it's not the case now, but usually we can have like pretty quick turnaround with our vendors. So say I walk in the morning, look at some of the reports are on holds and see, oh no, like I definitely missed the mark on that one. Could place an order that day and expect to see it probably within the next like 3 to 5 days in our buildings, and then we can turn it around fairly quickly. It's not really the case now, I'm sure. Everyone has heard about the supply chain issues plaguing everything, and that is also including our industry.
Yep, I know the publishing industry is disrupted. Your comments remind me of a conversation I was having with a representative that we at the Friends work with at Penguin Random House. And we asked him a question during a different event, what title totally has caught him off guard over the last couple of years? Maybe a sleeper that you thought you were going to have modest interest in as a reader. And then it just totally blew up and exploded. The example he used with us was Hamnet by Maggie Farrell. And that just completely caught them off guard in terms of how much traction and popularity it's gotten. I'm curious to know if there's a title that you have been surprised or delighted to see really just completely exceed expectations.
Do you have anything, Patrick? I'm just trying to, I have been out of the selection world for a couple of years now. I would say in general, I tended to always underestimate how much people were interested in reading sort of like political nonfiction. I'd be like, oh, maybe we'll get a couple of copies. And then I was like almost always wrong about that. So
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example. Broadly, a few years ago, European television mysteries in particular, not the British mysteries that we had, but we had a kind of an influx of German and French, whatever, mysteries, and Scandinavian, and I guess was one of the big ones. And they all overperformed my expectations for a while until I readjusted and reset. So I just knew to buy more to begin with, rather than having to buy additional copies of each one. So
Becky, I know you have a broad background in both academic and public libraries. I'm curious, I think a term you guys are using that would be helpful for our listeners to understand is, what is a cataloger? What does someone who is in that role do?
So you kind of saw in the video, just a brief glimpse of Suzanne, one of our catalogers, editing a record. And so I would say a significant part of what catalogers do is help patrons discover and gain access to our resources by importing, editing, or even creating bibliographic records for the library's catalog. So the library's online catalog is like a big inventory of everything that the library owns and makes available to the public, but it's also really an interactive tool of discovery for patrons. So we try to select the best bibliographic records for new books, DVDs, CDs, books on CD, and all other resources. And then we edit and import those records into our local cataloging software. So we make sure that materials are classified correctly and end up in the appropriate place so that patrons and staff can find what they're looking for, not only in the catalog, but also on the shelf. And then there's a lot of just sort of routine maintenance that we have to do and quality control. We respond daily to inquiries from branch staff, and we're also just involved in a variety of projects.
That's great. Thank you. I'm curious, just in terms of scale, how many items does the St. Paul Public Library on average add to its collection every year?
So in terms of new items, sort of pre-COVID, we were probably adding, this is for print items, between 90 and 100,000 items a year. Now it's closer to 70,000 now, in part just because of how we've spending has shifted, partially in response to COVID, but partially just in response to some other market pressures around accessing ebooks. So spending more money on ebooks getting more expensive has reduced the number of print items we add, but still 70,000 is still not a small amount.
No, not at all. The scale of that is amazing.
Items. Yeah, and every single one of those things, one copy at least goes through cataloging where they make sure that we've got good data on it, so it's findable in the catalog, and then every single other copy has to go through processing where it gets barcoded and spine label and a jacket if necessary. So lots of lots of items moving through our hands every
No
day.
kidding. Hey, you just mentioned something that I did want to touch on at some point in our conversation this morning, which is ebooks. I think if you are just a layperson like me, thinking about the cost of a physical hardbound book, instinctually you would think that must be more expensive than an ebook because an ebook isn't even a thing. But in the library world, I have come in my role to understand that ebooks are really expensive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so they are expensive. So I was just looking at Apples Never Fall by Leanne Moriarty. It's one of our like top requested titles right now. And so, you know, with the discounts we can get through our vendors, a hardcover costs like $15.80. And then the ebook costs $60 and we can keep it for 2 years. And that is like a one copy, one user. So in part to sort of protect their sales and you know, their copyright publishers sort of limit, they treat for the most part ebooks like a physical book. So even though like in theory we buy a digital license and there should just be like no technological reason why everybody couldn't read it at once, they do tend to function like books and how the licensing works. So if I check out a book, it's not available to anybody else until I return it. And one thing that's been changing in that market too, that's been really challenging for us is, you know, when they first came out, we were always sort of seeing these differentiated prices for libraries. I think publishers were always sort of nervous about what it would mean for their sales and for libraries to have access to their materials. And I think people in libraries would sort of point out that we do pay for materials and we help grow readers that then like buy materials themselves. So that's like a whole other soapbox.
Different program.
Yes. But they've reduced the licensing terms. So at first, you know, when we were first getting really involved in the ebook market, it was like you could buy it and it was like $65, but you could keep it forever. And then they're like, it's actually it's $65, but you can keep it for 2 years or 52 checkouts or 26 checkouts in a year. So that's been hard for us too. And that's something that has been increasingly happening in the downloadable audiobook market as well. And those licenses are more expensive to begin with just because of the costs around producing an audiobook are, you know, more than the cost of producing a book. So, you know, those are like $80 to $100 and now we maybe get to keep them for 2 years. So that's been really challenging.
It's a complex market. Thank you for taking time to sort of explain how that works. Because again, I don't think that that's intuitive. I'm going to want to move on to our next video and then come back with you guys and chat again. But beforehand, I'm going to, Becky, turn to you again. We've talked about how books come into the library. How do books leave the library? Where do books go when they are pulled off the shelf and pulled out of collections? And how are those decisions made?
Oh, like the weeding decisions?
Yes.
Where
do books go to die?
The book sales. I'll actually turn that over to Jessica because
okay,
a little bit more than I do.
Okay.
Yeah, so on our website, we actually have like a collection management policy, and in it kind of details the decision points at which we would say like goodbye to a book. So if a book is damaged, like it's time to thank it for its service. If it's out of date, if we've gotten a newer version of it, and then if it's no longer being used. And I think that one is really like a challenging one for all of us, is like, okay, when are we sure an item is not being used, you know? And it can be things like we bought a lot of copies to begin with to meet demand has trailed off. We still have all these copies and they're not like bad materials. They're things that somebody could use, but a lot of time it's just like a trade-off for us. It's like, do we have 10 copies of, you know, this former best-selling title, or do we have sort of 10 mid-list titles that might appeal to like a broader range of users? So, you know, just given the limitations of like physical space, that usage question always gets fairly challenging. And we do run some reports. We can run reports internally to try to like dig at that question a little bit, but it always feels like, I would say, like fairly qualitative. So we, you know, really rely on the judgment of staff who know their collections, know their community, to use their judgment in making those decisions.
Great. Thank you. Well, let's go look at how a book travels to the hold shelf, and then we'll come back again and have more conversation. We are back. That video showed what happens when a book is checked out and returned. What happens when a book is on the shelf?
The end stage of the process is fairly similar, but what happens to get the book off the shelf is a paging list, it's called, that our software system generates, that gets sent out to the staff in the branch libraries to say, like, hey, go get this book off the shelf, basically. So that's a process they do at least daily. Sometimes they do multiple times a day to help get things moved through more quickly. So they would go through take the report, go onto the shelves, grab the item, check it in, and then it gets sort of routed to us and then routed to where it needs to go, if it's not just going onto their whole shelf there.
So I'm actually really intrigued, like what part of the holds process requires the human touch and what your staff's involvement is with the holds process. And then I also think this is probably a great time to talk about the computer system and the return system and equipment. I mean, we see the books sort of moving through really complex systems. So I'm interested in spending a little time talking about the human side of the holds process and then the computer side of the hold process.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, so we have, depending on the library, you have like a sorter of like varying complexity that can do things, you know, sort of in response. So we use like optical scanning, so scanners that actually like read the barcode. And then, you know, depending on sort of how much room you have and how much intake of materials you have, you might have a library where it's like things that go in transit to another library that nobody's waiting for go in one bin, and things that are staying at your library go into another bin, and then things that need to go out on hold or that the scanner couldn't read go into like an exceptions bin. And those do need to be like then manually scanned in to get like hold slips or, you know, to have their issues resolved. And then really like the computer system we use is like so powerful for like managing like bibliographic information and, you know, keeping track of who's waiting for this item and that sort of thing. But like a lot of the materials handling is like very manual. So, you know, nothing is getting back on the shelves without a person. You know, everything that is going in between buildings gets like manually put in a crate. And then we do all of our materials handling here is manual. So we are, you know, physically moving something out of one crate and putting it into another crate. And I think just, you know, until robots get a lot better, like, you know, you can't really beat a human for that sort of thing.
I don't want robots for that. I
either.
like the human side. I mean, the libraries are about people. So
yeah,
that's great.
So it's really nice to have the automated check-in, just because that's sort of a thing that like you don't need a person to do necessarily if a computer can do it. But a lot of it does still need the human touch. And then our team is also involved. So I referenced earlier sort of like the holds ratio. So maintaining, you know, a set number of copies per holds request, and that, you know, we have our targets, but then sometimes like budgetary factors or sort of other circumstances will arise that will cause us to adjust it sort of plus or minus either way. So we do monitor that, and a lot of that like sort of sets the experience for how quickly holds move through We also do some of the like quality control, I almost want to say, on the holds list. So we check to see if like, has somebody been waiting for this for 3 months, or has this been sitting on the shelf for a while, but nobody has pulled it, to sort of help keep that process moving. There's a lot of moving parts. So as I'm sure you can imagine, like,
Yeah.
there are lots of places where things can fall through the cracks. So we also try to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Super. And then what is the role of technology? Where does technology serve as a helper for all of you guys? I'm thinking about the computer system, return systems, I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me personally with cataloging, it's been great because there's a lot of collaboration within the cataloging world by using like shared resources and shared databases. And so we can kind of improve upon things that other people are doing, or they can improve upon our work as well. So I think that's something. And then obviously seeing what the public catalogs can do, and again, how they're interactive and how much information people can get out of them. Again, when I was very young, I still remember the card catalogs, and I'm like, I just think of where we are now. It's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the interlibrary loan world, this year we've been implementing a new piece of software that allows the MinLink system through which all the interlibrary loans are handled, and our actual St. Paul catalog system to interface with each other, which has its pluses and minuses. It is more efficient when it works, but it's just an additional piece of software for there to be problems. So occasionally it has issues, but overall, this has been it allows us greater flexibility with how the staff time involved in bringing in materials works.
Great. And I'm super excited. We're going to talk about interlibrary loans in our next segment too. So we'll dive deeper into what that is for folks that are listening going, what's an interlibrary loan? Jessica.
Yeah, so, obviously like the automation that we can have with technology is great. I think a lot about, in terms of like collection planning and responding to demand is just like the statistical information that we can get from having, a catalog system that tracks checkouts and holds and that sort of thing. And we didn't mention it, but sort of synthesizing and gathering data is a big chunk of work that Patrick does as well for us. We decided that 2 jobs was not enough jobs, so he will have an additional job. So I really, that's useful for decision making and for planning our budgets, and for answering questions about how to allocate our resources. And like, there's never a clear-cut answer in the data, and we always want to be like mindful about how like data can reinforce sort of what we already believe or what we're already doing. I think a lot about like when I was a selector, and I'd be like, okay, this book checked out, that's great. Like that tells me some things about that book that somebody at least thought it would be good. It doesn't tell me if they like read it. It doesn't tell me if it was useful or if they liked it. And then we have no information about all of the things we didn't get, except for to some extent for interlibrary loan, which I don't want to like spoiler the ILA
Right.
too much.
Teasers.
I know, really setting it up. So in some ways, I think there can be sort of like a tendency, for me at least, to sort of want to have more of a story in the data than is maybe always like accurate. But all in all, it's good that we can, pull information from our system, and that I could like put it in Excel and not have to do like a hand spreadsheet. I don't really remember a time before Excel. So in my professional life, obviously.
There you go.
It's true. It is wonderful the amount of data that we are able to get from our system. We always run into the risk of, we have this question and we have this information, and they don't necessarily go together, but we're going to answer this question with whatever information we have available, rather than finding this what would be the correct information, but we just don't have it. So that there's always the push and the pull, but it is an amazing amount of information that we have at our fingertips.
As I'm listening to you all, I think the thing that is really striking is how important the human side of library work really is. And what that causes me to think about is, each of you individually, I'm wondering, what are the challenges that you find in your role and what really excites you about your work? And Becky, if I could turn to you first, what sort of, from your personal perspective as a human working in the library to make sure that we all experience so much of what the library has to offer, what for you presents the biggest challenges, and where also do you get really excited about your work?
I'd say for me, it's very detail-oriented work at the same time that it's really time sensitive. So you're always balancing speed with accuracy. There's a high level of turnover expected, but also a high level of accuracy. And I used to kind of joke that sometimes you feel like, oh, if this is cataloged incorrectly, is it going to fall into a black hole and nobody can find it ever? So you do kind of feel a little bit of that pressure of like, I want to make sure that this is correct. And I think over the years, there's a weird sense that I got where I can look at a record and sort of hone in right away on if there's something incorrect about it or something that's not right. So that's something that I think has just taken years to do, but it's there. So that's pretty cool. But I think for me, again, what's exciting about the work is look, I'm an avid library patron too. So when I walk into a library and I see the collection, I think I just see a huge potential for learning, for exploring, for all the stories that are there and all the facts that are there and all of the opportunities that people have, again, just to learn or to experience something new. And so for me to work at MMC and to see the new material coming in, it's a huge treat, just to see some of the sweet picture books or an exciting teen series, or once in a while there'll be a new book by an author that I really like that I'm like, oh, I didn't know this was coming out. So I'll go ahead and try to make sure I get a hold on it. So that's always a treat. And I think one thing that's really gratifying though too about the work I do is feeling like I can help to make a connection between what a patron is looking for and then that resource, in the catalog or on the shelf. So hopefully that's, introducing somebody to something new or filling a need that they have for learning. So that's really gratifying.
Thank you so much. Patrick, what do you think about when you think about the challenges and what excites you in your work?
Well, there are for different answers for the different tasks that I do. I think about with interlibrary loan, I'm just excited to make sure that everybody is getting what they want out of the library with a collection that serves such a broad population. By nature, it's kind of, it focuses on what the most people will want, but the interlibrary loan kind of deals with the fringes of that curve of interest. And so making sure that if somebody wants something that is not broadly popular enough to come to the level of being purchased by this library, it might be, something that the University of Minnesota has, or the, Rochester picked up a copy or whatever. So just having that pipeline of things, that making sure that whatever it is that a patron wants, that they're getting it from somewhere, even if we don't have it. On the selection side, it's just exciting because I love movies, I love music. It's just always exciting to kind of dig through and see what's coming out and what classic things we don't have that tie into what's happening that month or whatever else. As for challenges, the biggest challenge on the selection front for me is, or one of them at least, is managing patron expectations based on this changing marketplace of video and audio. Netflix is advertising very heavily. I don't know if I can say Netflix, can I?
You just did.
Big streaming
It's okay.
services advertise very heavily, and patrons will hear about a title that's very popular on some service or another, and they'll think, oh, I will get that from my library. I don't have that service, but the streaming services tend to be buying things as exclusives, and so it's kind of dealing with this patron expectation of being able to get everything from the library, and in some cases not being able to. Music as well. There's some movement towards things being available digital only. It's not as broad as maybe the industry would have us believe, but people still want things on CD. I understand.
And vinyl.
Yeah, and vinyl.
Jessica.
Audio cassettes are coming back.
Right. Oh no, not audio cassettes. Vinyl is fine. Let's stick with vinyl. Jessica.
For me, the answer is kind of, for both questions, is the same thing. So there's so much that we try to do with our collections and so many needs that we are trying to meet with it. So, just thinking about the library's collection management policy, and, in it says that we're there to support the mission, vision, and strategic direction of the library, and also to support like the learning, information, education, and entertainment needs of our community. So like just in that's a lot of stuff right there, where we're always trying to make decisions about like what are the trade-offs we're going to make. So, if we just anything we buy is another thing that we don't buy, right? So if we buy a ton of copies to make the holds lists not take as long, then like what are the other needs that we can't meet with our own collections? And we've really, as a part of this like beautiful strategic direction we have right now, where we're really trying to focus on community, and part of our charge in our world is how do we make our collections more like equitable and responsive?
Yes.
And how do we do that within the framework of the publishing world that exists? And to Patrick's point about like things that we just can't get anymore, and how do we sort of balance that against the fact that we can respond to demand for a bestseller, but a lot of times still the bestseller lists are populated very much by white authors. So how do we trade all of those off? And I think the ways that we're trying to approach that question are really exciting to me, and sort of the ways that it challenges us are challenging. And then of course there's the ebook stuff that we talked about. Just the digital world is not really a friendly place for libraries. We really have a solid home in like the analog world, and there's just so much tension around what's going to happen digitally.
Oh, I really, really appreciate these insights. So, oh yes, Patrick.
And I had
Yeah,
one
of
more
course.
challenge that as a selector, it's very easy, or relatively easy on new materials. When things are being published, I can kind of have a grasp of what is coming out and narrow it out into things that we are going to buy and things that we are not. The challenge is our existing collection and maintaining things if they've gone missing, if the last copy got weeded for condition, just keeping track of this whole collection. Again, because weeding is handled at the branch level, a lot of times it will not come to my attention that we no longer have a copy of something that we ought to have a copy of.
Sure.
Not the most recent, but the 2 Spider-Man iterations ago, I just discovered that we had a waiting list and no copies because the last copy presumably was damaged. So I had to go out and get some more copies. But it's I try to struggle against allowing the collection that you actually see on the shelf to be driven by this kind of attrition of weeding and loss through other means, and want to make sure that we still have some oversight over making sure that we have not just what's new and popular, but the kind of the broader collection covered as well.
Thank you. Really, again, just so insightful to see behind the scenes and get your insights as to how this very complex world works in both the, as we said, analog, digital, books, music, movies, all of it. So thank you so much. And I'm particularly appreciative, Jessica, of really lifting up the importance of and the prioritization of the collection also being equitable and representative of who are our neighbors in St. Paul, who lives here, and what do all of the residents of St. Paul want and need to have the library meet their needs. So with that, we're going to actually expand outside St. Paul with our next segment. We're going to watch a video on interlibrary loans. And then when we come back, having teed it up a couple times now, we're going to figure out what are interlibrary loans and learn a little bit more about that. So back in a few. Thanks. We are back. We just watched a video on interlibrary loans, and it's a really fun, fast-paced look at interlibrary loans. But Patrick, I'm going to turn to you for a quick question. Just tell us in a couple sentences so that we're all grounded for the rest of this part of our conversation. What are interlibrary loans?
Well, very simply, though our selectors are very nearly perfect, we can't have everything in the St. Paul Library. And so it's just the mechanism by which, if you want a book, we don't have it, we request it from another library system. Or if somebody at another library system wants a book and they don't have it, but we do, we can send it to them.
So then how do requested materials move around the state?
It's a multi-step process. Each library system has their own delivery, internal delivery, branch to branch. And so, you know, the item is on our shelf at Sunray, it gets sent here, we take it, process it, and put it in another delivery. The Minitex office at the U of M orchestrates the statewide delivery system for us. So there's a daily delivery, a courier that runs from each library system to Minitex, where items are sorted, and then from Minitex to each library system in the state.
Wow. What is the scale of this? Like, how many items are coming into the St. Paul Public Library system from, you know, around the state, and how many are we sending out?
Well, pre-COVID, we were receiving about 20,000 items every year for our patrons, and
Wow.
sending out about 25,000 for patrons at other library systems. This year, our levels haven't quite gotten back to that. They're recovering. We've done about 18,000 items out so far this year and about 12,000 items in for our patrons.
Wow, that is amazing. And I would imagine that these are items, I mean, the reason that we need these interlibrary loans, as we've seen, is these are not titles that everybody's going to have on their shelves. And so tell me about some interesting, like, what have you seen come through? What comes in, what comes out? Like, just kind of quirky, fascinating, maybe obscure subjects that you've seen through interlibrary loans.
Yeah, so because there's a statewide policy for interlibrary loan of not requesting from another library system something that you own in that system, we're kind of limited to this little subset of materials that are popular enough to be wanted, but not popular enough to be owned everywhere. But that covers a huge wide variety of things. We've gotten everything from pie pans. There are multiple libraries that have a collection of, you know, Thomas the Tank Engine shaped pie pans, or, you know, we had a pumpkin one come through a few weeks ago, to vampire themed paperback romance novels, to academic journals, to, again, materials that are very popular, but we just lost our last copy of it. So that's a cue for us to see that, oh, we no longer have a copy of that bestseller from 3 years ago or whatever.
And the flip side of that, I wonder, is like, are are there parts of the St. Paul collection that maybe are unique to what you guys have acquired over the years that get requested and get sent out?
Yes, we send out a wide variety. We're one of the larger libraries in the region, and so, I mean, we're not as big as some, but we're a lot bigger than a lot of the smaller rural libraries. So we represent kind of a lot of our collection is outside of what constitutes their collection. And so we send out a pretty broad array of things. We've sent everything from a Harry Potter book to a library in Iowa. Why they didn't have Harry Potter, I can't imagine. But we also have our own running list of ILL bestsellers over the years, which include books about building an earth oven in your backyard. There's a book about making sword making, not just making your own sword, but making a really fancy sword. I'm not sure where that's going all the time, but we send it out a lot.
Wow.
There's things when Svetlana Alexievich won the 2015 Nobel Prize for Literature, her 1985 book, The Unwomanly Face of War, was long out of print, and we apparently had one of the last copies in the country, and we were constantly sending it out for 2 years until it got republished in 2017.
That's absolutely fascinating. Wow. I'm thinking as I listen to this cannot be a cheap endeavor. I mean, when you think about the coming and going and the transportation and the personal handling and cataloging required to manage an interlibrary loan system. Jessica, is this a question for you to just what is the budget impact of interlibrary loans?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And Patrick and I were talking about it a little bit this morning, because so much of it is supported by Minitex, which is like a state agency, which is housed out of the U of M. They have a budget of like $5.9 million, and they don't just do interlibrary loan with that. They also do the Electric Library for Minnesota. They do eBooks Minnesota, and they have like their own overheads as well around staffing. So interlibrary loan is a piece of what they do, but a lot of the things like the statewide courier and the software, some of the software that we use is covered by that. And then a lot of the things that we do to like move things around and that sort of thing are really, it's because we're already doing that with our own internal holds. Like there's some good economies of scale related to moving things around. Like if we're already sending our own books around, it doesn't like cost that much more for us to throw in an interlibrary loan. Certainly there's added staff time to it. As Patrick mentioned, we've added some software that's trying to help reduce the amount of staff time that we use, but like also software is a non-free thing. So there's some costs there, but really, to Patrick's earlier point about like, we can't get everything just because of, the limits of our resources, our space, our money. And it's just not possible for any library to have everything. The service itself is like really invaluable. And, I think we definitely gain more out of it for our patrons than we spend. So it's sort of like a non-answer because it's not a line item in our budget. So.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that, like Jessica said, there's kind of two questions nested within that question. The larger scale, the statewide infrastructure costs something. You'd be better off asking Minitex about what exactly that costs. But I have also heard a lot of people throw around numbers that have been quoted in library journals or whatever about the cost of an interlibrary loan, which are largely based on regions where they don't have this infrastructure in place and where it costs postage to mail an item from one library to another, and dedicated staff time above and beyond what is normally being handled, whereas the cost of any individual interlibrary loan, because of this infrastructure that's in place, is negligible. I know there have been patrons who've said to us, I don't want to do an interlibrary loan because I've heard they cost $25 an interlibrary loan or whatever. I don't want to have that tax money spent on this thing that I want, but isn't that important? And I always try to say, because this is already happening, any individual interlibrary loans, it costs very little.
And the more people interlibrary loan, the less it costs per item, right? Yeah, we are really fortunate to have such a robust state infrastructure, and Minitex, the agency that orchestrates all of this, is actually turning 50 this year, which is very exciting. They started,
Wow.
they got funding in 1971 when they were the Minnesota Interlibrary Teletype Experiment. I like that experiment is still sort of part of their acronym, even though they're now 50.
That's great. I didn't realize that. Well, happy birthday, Minitex, and thank you, Minitex. We are really fortunate to live in a state that does have such an integrated system and efficient by, it sounds like, many, many standards relative to what other regions of the country have to deal with. You know, we're also so fortunate here in St. Paul. I mean, just even spending time with each of you this morning, it just helps you really realize how rich and wonderful this library system is. But why it's rich and wonderful is because of the people who are caring for our library and really being so thoughtful about what ends up on a shelf, what ends up in a bin, how we recommend and help guide people. I really appreciated, Becky, you know, your sort of that larger idea of connecting people to something that can open a door. I mean, it's these, we talk about libraries as journeys and trips to the moon and trips to the depths of the ocean. And it's so true, but the collection is where all of that starts, and the collection starts with people. So super grateful for that. I also reflect, and I think I'm really appreciating even more so than usual, when people have chosen to invest in this and really recognize the value of this. And so for Friends donors, just to turn it back to you for a second, those who are listening today, we make this possible. The St. Paul Public Library is a department of the city of St. Paul, and the city does a good job of funding the materials budget, but it is never enough. I mean, clearly, ebooks, all of the things that we've touched on, the balance between how do you purchase popular titles and how do you meet broader, but maybe needs that are more niche for parts of our community. The needs can be endless in terms of developing the collection that we want and deserve for people in St. Paul. So I just want to lift up two things here real quick. We have two endowment funds at the Friends that are specifically designated for collection purchases. I know I'm looking down so I make sure I say her name correctly. Mary Ida Thompson Fund is an endowment fund that specifically helps bring money to you guys every single year to purchase materials. And then we have a number of other funds that all sort of work together to make sure that the collection continues to be restored and enriched. So I guess for folks who are already friends in supporting the library, I just encourage you to think too about how can we continue to support the collection, not only in our lifetime, but this is a wonderful legacy to leave for future residents of St. Paul. So I want to wrap things up. You guys have been so generous with your time, and I cannot resist. I am on a screen with three super talented, really intelligent people who know so much about what is available out there for us. So I have to ask for a recommendation, either a reading recommendation or, you know, what are you seeing in the collection that you're really excited about? And Jessica, I will put you on the spot first. Do you have a recommendation you could share with me?
So I was just thinking about what I'm listening to right now, which is the new Outlander audiobook, which is 49 hours long. And the only way I can get through it is because the narrator, Davina Porter, is excellent. She is so good at what she does.
Oh, awesome.
So I do a lot of like narrator driven audiobook listening because they can really make the experience, and she is a narrator I really enjoy. I don't know if she does a ton else because she records 49 hours of audio
books
for Outlander, but she's great.
Good. Becky, what are your thoughts with this question? Putting you on the spot.
Oh, no problem. So one of my go-to authors is Kate Atkinson. She writes a series of mysteries with the characters Jackson Brody. They take place in, I think it's Edinburgh, but all over England. But she's also written some standalone books, Life After Life and A God in Ruins. I think those two are actually sort of connected. But she is funny, dark, there's mystery, a lot for everybody. And then one more, I think, just for kids, like picture books, I think you can't go wrong with, there's an illustrator named Kadir Nelson. He does a lot of books about African-American history, like historical figures and things, but just a lot of beautiful, beautiful illustrations in his books. I mean, they're just a delight to kind of page through. So those are two.
Great, thank you. And Patrick, what would your answer to this question be?
Well, not knowing what movies you're interested in specific, I will go with my own somewhat esoteric tastes. There was an animated movie, all of 20 minutes long, from my internet seems to have stopped working here. I can't look up the date right at the moment. Called World of Tomorrow, by an animator named Don Hertzfeldt. All his own, as a one-person production. As I said, it's 20 minutes long. It's this bizarre science fiction time travel story, but it is both hilarious and the best science fiction movie I have seen in a decade. It packs more ideas into its 20 minutes than any two other full-length science fiction movies.
Wow, those are all good endorsements. Wonderful ways to spend time with a book or listening, or it sounds so fascinating. So thank you for that. Sorry if that put you on the spot, but I can't resist. I want to thank each of you again. I want to thank the donors who are with us, friends of the library who are wanting to take a deeper dive into how the library works. I want to thank the staff at the Friends who are making this possible today, but also all of the staff at the library, all the work that you do that allows us who are residents of St. Paul to really benefit from just the wonderful collection and the experience of being in a library. And a reminder to everybody, the libraries are open. We have a lot of wonderful safety protocols in place so that you can feel good when you're in the library. But I also just encourage you, get back in the library, go to a shelf in a section maybe that you haven't been to before and try something new, because clearly we have just a thoughtful, gifted, and talented group of people making decisions that can really enrich our lives in so many ways. So thank you guys so much for your time. And I really look forward to hearing more about all of this in the coming days and months.